welcome to the One Life podcast, where we talk about things from One Life Church, but ultimately things we think can relate to you and your one and only life. My name is Sarah Inman. I'm one of your co-hosts of the podcast. And I do want to start out, again, just saying, hey, if you've heard anything or hear anything today that you find interesting or think other people would enjoy, we'd really appreciate it if you share that, either on social media or just writing a comment wherever you're watching or listening. That'd be terrific and great for us to know that you're getting some content that you enjoy, and it would help us out to know what to continue to talk about. So I'm joined, as always, by co-host of the podcast and our lead pastor, Brett Nicholson.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad to be here. And I like the fact that you're challenging people to give comments, because it would be nice to know we ask a lot of questions around here, and we evaluate things all the time, and we want to know that we're doing something that's valuable. And you may have a comment or a question that makes it a lot more valuable if we respond. So we study that all the time and are very open to that. So please do.
Yep. Brett and I sat a couple weeks ago when we had a week in between. We tried to evaluate some things about the podcast, and we'd love your guys' input as well as, what kind of things do you like to hear? What kind of things maybe haven't been that important to you? I don't know.
That's okay. This was a complete dud. You can say things like that.
You can.
It's all right.
And I have had one person tell me, that episode wasn't very good. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you.
You didn't even tell me that.
I'll tell you later.
You'll have to tell me later which episode it was. Yeah.
But hey, that means they're listening. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time. We try to keep these about 30 minutes and hopefully just something we think can relate to you and ultimately create conversation. That's the one thing that I wrote down in my notebook. What should every episode have? And it's just continuing having conversation. So today we have creative arts director and pastor at our West campus and everybody's friend, Matt Breivogel.
That's right. Everybody's friend. If you don't have a friend, Matt can be yours.
He can.
I'll be your friend.
Yeah, and Matt taught at our Evansville campuses over the weekend, and then Ryan Nunn taught at our Henderson campus. And so I know you guys spoke, you and Ryan talked a bit about your messages and used some similar content. So we wanted to just continue having the conversation with Matt and really just talking a little bit more about some of the things that he had in his message. So first of all, Matt, I have a couple questions for you. They kind of relate to the message, but are also just questions for you. So first off, you're kind of known in some of your messages and in general to add some dance moves, right? And you had one yesterday.
Yeah, a subtle little shake of the feet, if you will.
You did?
He did.
Yeah, I did.
Did you do it at both campuses? You did it at East?
I don't know. I think I did it.
Was I paying attention?
I know you did it at West.
I didn't see it.
To you, that's just Matt, probably my daily thing. You didn't notice
That's right. Okay, that may have been it, if it was that subtle.
So was dancing always something that you just did and it became something you're like, hey, I'm kind of not bad at this, and you just continue to do it? Or was it just something that, did you take like lessons anywhere? Or?
If by lessons you mean my older brother and I watching a lot of hip hop videos growing up, he was older than me, and so that was what he was into, therefore that's what I watched. And so in the 80s, hip hop, you had the guy rapping, but there's always the two guys dancing in the background, like doing moves and jumping over each other. And so that was what me and my brother would emulate in our living room, watching like BET and Yo MTV raps and stuff. And so then obviously I became a Michael Jackson fan as a kid of the 80s. And so emulating his dance moves, I remember specifically, I can't remember what year it was, but Michael Jackson was on Oprah, and he was teaching her some of the moves and how to do the moonwalk and stuff. And my mom recorded it because when she had to work during the day, so she wanted to watch it later. Well, I was watching it, and I remember like watching it in slow motion and pausing it and like, okay, his feet do that. And then I'm in my kitchen learning the moonwalk. That's how I learned it.
Wow. And have I seen you do the moonwalk? Well, I don't know that I have.
I'll do it for you.
The actual one. Yeah, absolutely. You need to do that. Yeah.
Maybe we'll
I had never heard that you were a product of Oprah and Michael Jackson together working.
Taught me
and watching that,
because
teaching
of
you that.
That's funny.
I'm glad I asked that
because I
question.
wondered, okay, so because she said, being good at it, which you are, you get away with it. But dancing is always one of those things. How do you know when that time's come that you can actually do it in public? Because most of us would not do that.
It probably came just sixth grade. I went to my first like school dance, and just was busting out some of the moves. And not a lot of people were busting out moves back then. My older brother taught me dance moves.
So did they create a circle around you?
That has happened.
That happened?
That has happened.
Really?
Times, yeah.
Wow. Never happened to me. Not once. I don't think it's going to either. Yeah.
I like that we went down this road because you weren't expecting it at all.
Now I'm embarrassed.
No. And then on a little bit more of a different note. So, and you've taught here at One Life multiple times, and I don't know if I've really asked you this before, and Matt and I work together every day. So I have multiple times to ask this question, but when was the first time you really taught from a platform, like giving a message, like a sermon type thing?
Okay. I guess depends on what size platform you mean.
Or when did you know, I guess, that that's something that you wanted to do?
Oh, man.
Did someone just ask you and you did, or?
So
I was curious about that.
In the earliest times, it was filling in for our high school youth group leader. And maybe he saw something in me. And if he was going to be out on Sunday, he would give me the content, and say like, hey, I'm going to need you to do it. And I took that very seriously. I thought that was a cool thing. So it's probably starting there, leading my peers in some of that context. And then in that same group later, a few years later, after I graduated college, then leading the high school Sunday school group, and then, launching Lampstand with Austin, him and I co-teaching and taking turns leading, a room of about 30 people. It's a good place to start. And then the first big group I ever did like a formal kind of sermon in front of, Trey McLean gave me the opportunity when they were still at Discovery Church in the theater on the west side. And so then that's the first time I'd been in like an auditorium type setting where I'm the person having to teach something. And just gonna be dead honest, 50% of that sermon was probably really similar to a sermon that Tim Keller may have given. But I just made it me, my personality, but like the points and some of the it was like, that's kind of where I was and how I was learning and trying to grow in that at the time. It was a while back now. But yeah, no, I got comfortable. I got affirmed in that by some people, even doing that. And I just grew my confidence, and then, just doing that. And then I remember my first time I ever taught at One Life, we were doing a project, probably the second one, I guess, we ever did at One Life. And it was when we did it at a site specifically. A team would travel. And I guess they went to West to do it. And so Henderson needed just kind of a one-off message. And Brett said, just do a message on why you trust the Bible, your journey in that. And that was an easy one because that was all me and just kind of giving my journey and how I believed about that. And so that was my first message I ever did at One Life. And it was just to Henderson on that day. And that, I went back and watched a little bit not too long ago. I'm like, oh man, I've gotten better a little bit. So that's good, But
it reminds me, I think I've said it on here. My favorite compliment I ever got was a lady said, "You've improved so much."
Yeah.
That's just a great thing to hear. Like, thank you very much.
I do remember maybe my second time I had somebody come up to me afterwards, and this was when we were still preaching live from Henderson on Sundays. And he's like, you know what? I come and Brett, he does a really good job, and I was hoping it was going to be Brett, but you know what? You surprised me. You did a really good job today. I'm like, okay,
you surprised me.
He was like, because I guess he saw me come. He's like, oh man.
Yeah.
Still gave me a compliment somehow.
Well, he did. That's right. You can take that.
I'll take it.
But from the time, I think I remember the first time you ever did speak, and I got a lot of, people get a lot more feedback when it's the very first time they've ever seen you or whatever else. Mm-hmm. And I got a lot of positive feedback out of that. And even people saying things like, you think I'll be the one that is after you? You should have him do that. It was like, wow, okay, we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit. But
we're still pretty young.
Is that a hint? That's right.
That's funny. And one of your, well, I guess your main point you gave twice yesterday, and I wanted to read that, and you used a pretty interesting example, and I thought it'd be fun to have a conversation about that here. But you said, don't play the comparison game, and always remember the good news. In your example, you gave kind of towards the beginning of your message, talking about you meet people in other church settings, and maybe you guys introducing each other, getting to know each other, and usually one of the first questions people ask you is what?
How much you guys running on Sunday mornings? How many you running?
How many you running?
That's Which right. is speak for
that goes
what's your
back
attendance.
As long as I've been doing this, is like 25 years. And what are you running? That's just how it's said when you go to different church contexts. Yeah,
it's just interesting. Like and I feel like I've had that before. People say, "Well, you guys are a big church," or "You're," they use those types of terms, or "You guys have a lot of people," or "How many people do you have?" And kind of can you talk a little bit more about the conversation around that you had?
Yeah. And so for me, every time I get that, it kind of pauses me for a second, because I always wonder, like, why are they asking? And then the secondary thing that's happening in my head is my heart goes multiple places. Like, am I going to have to exaggerate based off like last Sunday was low? I mean, I've honestly,
I like the way you worded that. Am I going to have to exaggerate? Because
it's just, it's funny. It is definitely a heart thing for me to say, because, you know, I remember a few years ago, the number might've been a little bit bigger. I mean, it just was. And, you know, we plateaued for a bit and we're kind of on this little cool uptick, but, yeah, like your pride kicks in and you want to give your best Sunday number to this person for some reason. And I don't know, it just is a weird thing.
Yeah,
me.
people need to know. I mean, if you're not kind of inside the church leadership culture, you may not think about it. I think your average person in the seats thinks about it a little, maybe. They know the difference between a fairly big church or a smaller one, because people have experiences with that. But inside the church world, it really is kind of a street cred thing that, and I've always kind of noticed that, let's just say it, when you go to a conference, when they introduce someone who's going to be a speaker, they'll almost always say, and he's the pastor of a church of 10,000 in such and such a community.
That's true.
They'll rarely say, you know, he's a pastor of a church of 112 and some community. They just won't say that. It won't come up. And so there's a little bit of, that's how we size things up. It just is, right, wrong, or indifferent. It does happen a lot. It's just there. And trying to get that flushed out of your system is really, really, really hard.
Yeah. I mean, it's a realistic curiosity. I mean, we're all doing this together, and you compare how things are going, and people want to genuinely know, because I think we learn from each other too, you know. That's kind of
and there is something to be said for, like, you'll hear of a church that went from 0 to 10,000 or something like that. And you wonder about that, because like I think you pointed out the stats in the sermon that, what is it, 10% are 250 or...
Yeah, about 11%. 1 in 10 churches are over 250 on a Sunday morning attendance.
Okay. So it's very non-typical for something to even grow to a 500 or 1,000 or whatever. So if something really explodes, attendance-wise, there's a thing there that you wonder, okay, what was in the water, kind of thing. And it is attractive, and it's one of those things you wonder about. And we all know we've had the experience of planning some event, even if it's not a church thing, that we wanted people to come to. They didn't.
Yeah. You think it's going to be great.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than this sort of a empty room that you thought was going to be full, and it creates this ambiance that's difficult.
That statistic's interesting, and I always overthink things a little bit. But do you think that's because there are so many different churches that that number statistically can't be any higher than that? I mean, if you go down, I don't know, Picker Road in Evansville even, or Henderson, and you might see 10 churches, and maybe only one of them is 250 or more. And so statistically, that would be about 10%.
Well, it just depends on how well the church is being received and how much it's growing in culture at any given time, I think is what you have to measure to. Because if everybody in a specific neighborhood wanted to go to church on any given Sunday, they wouldn't be able to hold them.
Right.
So, it could be higher if people were attending.
There's a lot of sociological realities too, because you can read books and go to conferences and everything. And since I've been around forever, I've done this kind of stuff, because you're always torn on this whole issue, because again, it's a street cred thing. But there are books out there that will say things like how to break the 200 or 300 barrier, how to break 1,000 barrier, because there really are plateau places, and you can break out of certain patterns because you change how you do things. That's been documented, and people study this kind of thing. It's sociological issues that, for instance, to get past the 300 barrier, you typically have to turn a lot more leadership over. That usually 200 or 300 represents what one pastor can typically kind of keep track of and be at everybody's bedside and that kind of thing. And you have to, if you go to more of a leadership from the congregation model, you have a youth pastor or whatever else, you'll tend to be able to go beyond that a little bit more. And then it goes beyond that. So there's some of that kind of thing.
And you have to continue to re-up on your missional strategy, because I think I said this in my version of the sermon at West. I don't know if I said it at East, but we could pat ourselves on the back for being in that top percentile and say we're comfortable here and not get any bigger. But you got to rethink things and push yourself and do things different, change things. And a lot of times in religious circles I've grown up in, change is hard.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned a while ago, we actually went way up. We broke past 2,000 at one point, and then we went back down. And one of the reasons was because we simply didn't have the staffing to sustain it, and we didn't focus on. We let our groups kind of get sloppy, and you'll notice the uptick lately. There's a direct line between that and hiring people at each campus who can manage the group world, and the group world is fundamental to growth and all those kinds of issues. So it's like this strange tension between, practical things you can do and then the pride stuff, and it's a mess. It's hard.
Well, and I was thinking, and maybe you'll talk more about this in the next few weeks, because I know we are going to be this whole series, we're talking about church planting, and our life as mission and movement is the tagline of our current series here, as our localized church here. It's called Travelogue, and you can listen to Matt's message and Ryan's message on the One Life website, the One Life app, onelifechurch.org. You hit messages, or just open up One Life app and hit messages. But I know some of the statistics from some information that you've been reading, Brett, was talking about so many churches need to be planted by a certain date to keep up with just the changing culture. And when I think about that, when we talk about churches being under 250 people, I don't know, in my mind, like, are you going to have, 10 churches of 50 people? Is that kind of that same thing, or is it not? Or does it matter?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
I don't know either. I just think it's interesting now to think about it.
They say, and we'll kind of talk through this a little bit. First of all, that a revitalized church is nearly the equivalent to a new church. And so you can do one or the other. What they're saying, though, is that it has been proven time and time and time again, the most effective way to reach people is new churches, which it makes sense sociologically. Again, there's people that study these things and they watch this kind of stuff, that new churches appear to people to be more accessible. So if you have a new one out, because an older church, it makes sense. It already has an established societal kind of thing inside of its own culture, where it's a little bit harder to get in. Whereas if you go to a new church, you have a lot better chance of belonging and that kind of thing. And so it's more accessible. I don't know if that gets exactly to your question, but it's kind of like the more new you have out there. And they also have tracked that new churches can tend to wake up old churches, because a new church going up, I mean, it's not a competition thing, but it is sort of gosh, we haven't had a baptism in 5 years or whatever else, and we heard the church down the street is having a bunch of them. What are we doing? And then it makes the change a little bit more motivating. Otherwise, you'll just we're all this way. We'll just kind of keep doing what we've been doing, and get kind of lazy about it. And so new churches also help spring into new territory. So I don't know if you thought about that kind of thing while you were doing your message, but I don't want to sidetrack us on church growth stuff, because I've been going to conferences and reading books for a long time on all those things.
And we have some of that stuff coming up. Matt's working on a book that Brett wrote some content for, that'll be talking a little bit more about that will come in here. Matt is also, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, is our creative arts director. So anything super cool design that comes out of One Life comes from Matt's brain, which is pretty cool.
That's right. His brain and his skills.
And Brett's too.
Yeah. And you, Sarah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Usually it's just me like, I don't like that color, or let's tweak that a little bit.
But my question would be, as you were preparing for the message itself, and I like to think, sometimes you feel like you have something that you get across, but other times you're hoping something in there hits people as hard as it hit you. I mean, those are usually the best ones. Like when you're studying, there's like this. And sometimes I feel dumb about it, because something that I really care about a lot, you can almost tell that people don't as much. And you're like, wow, this is great. Yeah. And so I'll raise my voice or whatever else, but because it meant so much to me. Did you have like a thing when you were studying for it that really kind of struck you that hadn't struck you before?
Yeah, definitely growing in my understanding of it and my personal application of the Holy Spirit acting in my own life, in that whole portion of connecting us to God in his sovereign plan of saving and what he's doing, and then how that works out in our lives. In Ephesians says that God creates good works in advance that we should walk in them. And there's this sovereignty portion, and there's what we have to do and decide and follow on a daily basis, and being attuned to the Holy Spirit more and more. And I love that over the last few weeks, you've shown them how to make that more practical and accessible. And that's been working on me personally, just kind of reminding me of those types of things in my own life. And I wanted to try to continue that to a little bit. That's a whole sermon to itself.
Right.
And I feel like I tried to hit on it towards the end and push towards that and make it more practical. But yeah, that was probably the biggest part as we navigate, what we're talking about in the message of the successes and the rejections, but doing it knowing that the results, no matter what, are in God's hands. And we're just trying to be obedient and follow the Holy Spirit's leading. And it may feel like a rejection to us, but we never know what God is doing with it. So probably that part.
Yeah, which kind of makes my point that was a big thing for you. But I do remember in the context of the message, it was not an also ran, but it was something you hit on towards the end. But you didn't spend a lot of time with it, which I find is kind of interesting. That was the big takeaway for you.
I know.
But on the Holy Spirit thing, I think people struggle with that a lot, because as soon as you hear that, it gets there's a little bit of standoffishness about it and kind of spookiness to it and everything else. So when it comes to, are there other things that you didn't get to say in the course of the message that was helpful to you, as you've thought about this, whether in your own message or the ones you've heard from me or whatever else?
Yeah, and even in the context of the book of Acts, just studying it personally, I was telling you guys about this earlier, the Acts 17, Paul's message at the Areopagus. I don't know if I ever say that right, but he's talking to them, and he's talking about how God has laid out in our the times allotted to our existence and where we will even live, these people, so that they might reach out and find him. So he's not far from any one of us. And so if that's how God is reaching people, and then I remember early on in my journey of understanding this stuff and what it looks like to live more missionally in my own life, I was like, okay, if that's how God's reaching people, he's using people to reach people. That means my allotted place is not only to find God, but to help other people find God. Yeah. And so just that journey for me personally has been huge. And I remember just studying that and getting that in a more specific way for the first time. And I lived in Village Green Apartments on South Green River Road, right before the highway.
That's on the east side. Yeah.
Yeah. When Amanda and I first got married, that's where our first apartment was. And we lived there for maybe a couple of years. And so I immediately was like, everybody in my apartment complex, I got to see them with new eyes. And it was really interesting. And talking about being led by the Holy Spirit, I really felt like suddenly I was being led and directed to people like never before. It was really cool. And it made it so practical to me. You know, it wasn't some hoogity boogity, hyper spiritual thing where I got dreams and stuff. It was just like, well, that guy lives upstairs from me. I say hi to him every day. And then he told me, he's like, yeah, I'm moving or whatever. And I was like, okay, well, I've never talked to this guy that much. We've, just passed, and it's like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to burn some sermons on a CD and give it to him, because I knew he had a long drive. And I was like, he was literally packed up leaving. I was like, hey man, wait. And I read this out. I was like, I made this for you. It's just some like teaching on the Bible. I thought it's been helpful to me, and maybe you can listen to it while you drive. Maybe you'll enjoy it. He's like, oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it. And he drove off. I'm like,
oh, no kidding.
I was like, my last chance to talk to him.
Hear from him
I have
again?
no idea, but who knows what God might have done.
Let's do a follow-up episode and
That's
find
right. You're going to arrive in heaven.
Maybe
He's
that's
give you a big hug. Yeah.
Cheesy thing to do, but this is my last opportunity. I didn't get to talk to him, but maybe that was.
Well, at least you did something.
Yeah.
I mean, that's guided by the Spirit at that.
I think so.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Very good.
What kind? Do you guys have any kind of stories of stuff like that, like weird kind of?
I have one that pops into my head. It's similar. So I live in an apartment complex now, and the lady that lived above me for a long time, she doesn't live there anymore. She's pretty nice, but she's also one of those people that knew everything about everybody in the apartment complex, if you know what I mean. Like, she just kind of knew everything that was going on. Really interesting lady. And one day, so I, for 7-ish years or so, my friend and I co-led a group of middle school and high school students, girls, and we started with them in middle school and went all the way till they were seniors. And they had to have been in middle school at this point, and they were meeting in my apartment. And I don't know what we were doing. We're playing some sort of game where like you're standing in a circle, and apparently my neighbor had saw it. So a couple weeks later, she sees me outside. And she's like, hey, I had a question for you. She's like, what were you guys doing in your apartment? You guys were all in a circle. I thought you were doing like a seance or something. And I was like, no. I was like, we were probably playing some sort of game. She's like, oh, were you praying? I was like, well, we could have been, but I don't think so. But it just turned into a really interesting conversation that wouldn't have happened if she hadn't seen us just hanging out in my apartment.
Sure,
but she assumed that it was something bad, which was really also interesting.
Yeah, and you forget that people do think that way.
Yeah.
If they watch you in a circle. I appreciate your integrity, because you could have just said, well, yes, we were praying. We were praying for you. We were praying, studying, and deep in thought and everything else. So,
and so she actually knew you, knew of you. So she's like, "Oh yeah, Brett, I want to come sometime." Like, well, you're welcome to come anytime. She hasn't come yet.
Yeah, people tell me that all the time. I plan on coming. I do. Yeah, okay, right. That is because they don't know what else to say to me. They think I'm all about the numbers. Kind of what we were talking about a while ago. Yeah, you're running. If you were there, we could be doing a lot better. That would just how that would go. And so you had the comparison game thing.
Yeah.
And then remember the good news. Like when it comes to dealing with people, do you find yourself fighting for that? Or is that a thing that do you have like do you default? You probably don't because of your personality. You probably don't default into getting into other issues because the remember good news thing, I think, is one of the easiest things to forget as Christian people whenever we're talking about because we're hyped up about politics or just controversial issues that are out there. Yeah. But you probably are a little better at leaning towards the good news than other people I know.
Yeah, that's probably more of my personality. I'm more optimistic. I think I get it from my parents, just growing up, seeing how affectionate and loving, accepting they were of different people from different walks of life, and coming to our house and getting to know people and seeing how they treated people who maybe didn't believe the same thing as them and stuff like that. It was really cool. But honestly, it's when I have to remember the good news most is when I'm dealing with myself. When I preach it to myself, when I'm second guessing my personal value because of something, or like, you have those moments where you're laying in bed and memories of terrible things you've done in your past, like flood in, and they're kind of attacking your spirit as far as like who you are. And you have to remind yourself that that's gone. I'm, been redeemed from that. So honestly, I get more attacked by myself than I do thinking of doing that to others. So,
and I wonder if that's this kind of a principle of life, because maybe one of the reasons that we all tend to lean towards fighting over political issues or controversial things or whatever is because we haven't really taken in the good news ourselves as much as we see it as kind of a distant past thing. Like I came to Christ when I was a kid, but I didn't preach the good news to myself yesterday based upon this issue that I'm going through. So I'm filled with grace rather than, because the Bible says always let your conversation be full of grace. Well, you can't be full, you can't give out grace unless you've received it yourself maybe. And as you say that, it kind of strikes me that maybe that's one of the problems that doesn't translate very well to other people. It's easier to argue or something. Just a theory.
Yeah, and our culture says this is good news if everybody agrees with this topic or this side of the political spectrum, then everything will be better. And we create our own good news and we buy into that, and we're preaching that to ourselves, and we're only reading those authors and only hearing those people, so then we argue about it because that's what we're filling ourselves with, that other idea of what good news is. So possibly
your point, your example of talking about like church and how we play that comparison game by numbers, what would translate or relate to someone who maybe doesn't think of comparison in that way? Maybe they're thinking of they play the comparison game in something different. I'm trying to think of something that would be an example, or something that would help relate, even in just a normal work environment that's a business environment of some sort. Like what would be a similar thing there where you see that? Is it more of like playing comparison in the sense of I want to get what they have, like keeping up with the Joneses type thing, or how would you relate that?
I've got a couple. On the two examples that came to mind had more to do with when I was probably more in like high school, which is kind of funny. I had the comparison game thinking of myself as a believer of Jesus, but being in high school, being tempted in different directions, I would compare myself to people, and how quote unquote good I was based off not doing as much bad as one of my friends, and then that was how I compared that. It was like this weird way of justifying myself and what I did. But I definitely relate to students a lot because school is hard. Like I kind of breezed through. I never really applied myself that much. I think I ended up with like a B average. And so like you could compare big time with how good people do in school, or maybe even then you can apply that to how successful people are in business. So I know people who graduated the same year as me who seem like way successful. I'm like, look at how much they've accomplished in their 38 years. And I've like, have I accomplished that much? And you start to compare that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think you set almost deadlines for yourself. I could speak to this big time because I'm in the middle of a midlife crisis. I don't mind saying it because I'm supposed to be. I'm in my 50s.
You should see the convertible he just bought.
Yeah, I mean, because you start thinking in terms of, you notice people's ages or whatever. Well, this movie star or this sports star or even another pastor or whatever else, by this time in their life, they were doing these things, and when you start comparing that and make that your measure, like, oh gee, and then the midlife thing comes from, well, it's not like I have a whole lot of time. I can't go back and be some kind of superstar, and whether athlete or whatever else, and so where I'm going to arrive is pretty much where I am, and so that's and it is very much a comparison thing. Just what were they doing at my age and everything else, and so it can be a struggle. I think a lot of people deal with that.
It's really, so then what you both kind of said, it's more about how you define what success is, or what success that you want or you think that you need to have. And that really is, like, it kind of went back to your point. We talk about, like, the success was, people getting to know who Jesus is, right? And understanding
and
that.
making disciples.
Right, making disciples. So
if you think of people who are successful, like that we would, compare ourselves to and be like, oh, well, there's probably a group of people behind them who aren't known, who they discipled them, who loved them, who gave them an opportunity and made that success possible. So those people, they're just as important, or else that person wouldn't be there. And
exactly.
I love that, thinking that story, like, who knows how God is using you, if you're listening to this, in a really cool way, to care for someone and create something greater than you could know.
And then you take it further and you remember that if that's a definition of success, I can do that for others. So, because I know the background of because I have to think about that too, the comparison thing. You gave the example of there are churches that have, 30 plus sites, and there are churches that have, 30 people. And I'm fall kind of somewhere in between there. But so I have to remember that comparison thing. But at the same time, what am I doing to really lift others up? Because I know I've been lifted up, and there are people in my life and my background that help me get where I am that no one would know about. No one watching my life would know that they're there, and that I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for them. So can I be that for someone else? Is kind of a good thing to think. Okay, that would be successful, or success would be helping others get to wherever they want to go.
I think one of my favorite things, even on our team, Matt and I are on the creative arts and communication team, and it doesn't happen super often, but every once in a while we'll get either a friend or someone that is working, either starting or a part of a new church, and they'll be like, hey, how do you guys do this? And we love that. We love being able, not that we have everything figured out by any means, but we've made some mistakes and learned from them, and do some things that we feel like we do well, and some things that we need help with. And so it's really fun when even other churches are like, hey, how do you guys do this? And we love learning from other churches as well, which is really kind of a cool, neat thing. Matt, thanks for coming and hanging out with us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's
Super
fun to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
I got to kind of share a weird part of my personal story of learning Michael Jackson's Moonwalk on Oprah. And
that's right, which was a really, really good moment. I appreciate that. Now I know I have greater insight into who you are.
I'm definitely going to pull that up later and just see what you were watching as a child.
Yeah, we could probably find it.
It'd be great. Brett, anything coming up that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that people need to know going into 2020. Here in a couple of weeks, we are going to talk a lot about our direction as a church and where we're going, and people have asked that, or they've sensed that we're not going somewhere or something like that. So we're going to clarify that, and the church planning thing will come up. And then as the year progresses, we are going to be doing we're really going to be challenging everybody to invite people as part of making disciples. We're coming up in a series that's called Friends, and finally kind of came down to how I'm going to approach that. And it's going to be about excellence in relationships. I'm going to study how Jesus loved people, especially his disciples. He comes to the end of his life and he says, or the Bible says that he loved those who were his own in the world. And well, how did he love them? What did it mean for him to love them? And going back and tracing that and watching Jesus, actually how he did love people. So we'll be doing that. And then following that after Easter, we'll be talking about the scourge on our society called pornography. So that's coming up in the course of the year. And if I survive that, we've got other cool things coming up after in the summer and on to the fall.
I have an idea for the Friends series.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Every week, the title of the episode should be like a Friends title title of the sermons should be the title like a Friends episode, like the one where.
Yeah, that's like, true. That's right. They use that. All right,
yeah.
we're doing it.
It's going to happen.
You heard it right here. That's right. That's what we're going for it.
Guys, thanks so much for listening. Thanks for hanging out. And again, we would love to have your feedback. You can always email us at podcast@onelifechurch.org. And I also want to say a special thanks to our friend Scott, who's been helping us out the past few weeks, starting the camera, kind of behind the camera, helping out, setting up. And it's always really helpful to have people come in and volunteer and just learn some stuff. So we always appreciate that. Guys, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next week. We'd love to hear from you guys. You can email us at podcast@onelifechurch.org. You can leave a comment on YouTube or on Apple Podcast or anywhere you're listening to this podcast. We'd love for you guys to share that out. Let more people hear this great content and have an opportunity to continue that conversation even further. Our music was produced by Micah Robertson and Ben Brock. My name's Sarah, and I produced this episode.